that ring a bell? Like if you get a lot of students from, let's say, the UAE, and let's say almost all of them have done similar activities, what do you think about that?
I think that in a system that where you really want to pop out and stand out, it is incredibly different to do so if you look like everyone else.
Now with the AI, students can do a lot of things, less time, more creatively. Some may be authentic, some just designed through AI. How are the universities set up to identify this from a genuine student?
I think that admissions officers are trying to figure out that very question. How do we tell what is real and authentic and what is not?
Is too early to specialize in an area of expertise? And how does a student go deep without slamming doors shut, especially if they're weighing both US and maybe Canada options?
I think the most important thing that I encourage is don't stop doing something you enjoy doing just because it doesn't relate to your true interests. If you hate it, stop doing it. If you love it, keep doing it.
Hi, Beth. Good afternoon. How are you? And good morning to you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. No, I'm great. It's great to be here. Excited to record another podcast today with you.
Perfect. So today we are talking about the extracurricular activities, why some students stand out and others don't. And with your experience, your guidance will be of immense help. So my first question to you, you read applications at Penn, right, for years, and you've done that.
I did, yes.
So please be honest and tell us, when you reached the activity list, how much time did you spend on it? And what was it that stood out the most?
Sure. Well, I definitely, when I was at Penn, I read about 1,300 files a year, and I had about 15 minutes per file. So you can imagine it was a very long reading season, and I had to get through about 30 files a day. That was the goal. And the activities list was probably, actually not probably, it was the second thing that I turned to. So after I evaluated test scores and transcript in terms of grades and rigor of the curriculum that the student was taking,
Yeah.
I was then turning to, okay, what else are they doing with their time? And that was a huge piece of the puzzle in terms of most of the students whose applications I reviewed were doing very well in terms of grades and test scores and rigor. So the activities was where I looked for students to kind of help themselves set themselves apart. Couple of things that would always strike me when I looked at an activities list was there were 10 spots available on the application to fill out your activities. So I definitely noticed if a student hadn't filled them all out. And that was pretty rare. Not necessarily sort of an immediate like, oh gosh, they didn't have 10 things to list here. But more if they didn't have it completed, all the way with 10 things, I was looking for very deep involvement in the things that they were listing. But I would say that it was pretty rare that a student not only hadn't filled out all 10, but maybe had added a couple of others in the additional information section because they couldn't fit everything. But certainly it was mostly common to see those 10 things filled out. I was looking to see if they followed directions. Sounds silly. But at the time we said, you must complete this section. Don't say see attached resume. And it was shocking to me how every once in a while, not frequently, but a student would say, oh, see attached resume and not have filled it out. So just a plug for following directions. But what I really looked for was I was hoping that the highlights were up front, because in a 15-minute read of a file, I might spend, I probably did spend about 5 of those minutes focused on the activities grid, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but when you consider that there are schools out there where they might spend 5 minutes total on an application, it's actually a lot of time for that. And I was taking notes because when I would advocate for a student in committee, I needed to be able to give the selection chair, the committee chair, the highlights of why I thought this student was a good
Yeah.
fit or not. And so I was looking for leadership. I was looking for commitment. So I was looking to see that a student had committed to an activity for 3 to 4 years, that they had perhaps risen to a primary leadership position by the time they were a senior. I was looking for achievements. I wasn't necessarily looking for achievements that went beyond the
Mm.
school, but when a student had achievements that went beyond the high school, that was absolutely something that I would note, and that typically would lead to me, feeling like, oh, this student really has potential.
Mhm.
And so at Penn, we would grade each section of the application on a scale of 1 to 9, 9 being spectacular and 1 being not at all competitive. Most students for their activities list would come in somewhere around a 5 or a 6. Um, it was the students that came in around a 7 or an 8. I don't know that I ever gave anyone a 9.
Mhm.
Those were the students, and an 8 was exceptionally rare. But those were the students who you
Yeah.
thought, wow, this is a student I probably, if everything else holds together in the application, this is probably a student I'm going to be advocating to admit when it comes time for selection committee. One thing you'll notice I didn't say what those activities were, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and I'm curious, when you were reading in Canada and making decisions, were you looking at extracurricular activities as part of that process? Because not all schools do.
Yeah. In my time at University of Toronto, we only looked for activities for two faculties. One was engineering and business, and none of the other programs were actually looking at extracurriculars. It was mainly the grades which defined from for Canadian universities, you're in
Yep.
or you're out. So
Right.
yeah.
Right. And people, I think it's frustrating to people
Hmm.
that the US admissions system feels very opaque, because how do you know what's the right thing to do? But, I would also argue that it also gives you leeway as an admissions officer to look for the most interesting candidates, not just the
Yeah.
ones with the best grades. So obviously, University of Toronto, different than certainly the way Penn admissions.
No, absolutely. Now, going through the activities list, like you said, were you able to identify which ones were real and which ones were not authentic?
I would say that didn't believe that. I don't believe that most students at that time, and I don't believe they are now, based on the students that I talked to and on the applications that I've seen, were being inauthentic in what they were writing. So by that I mean most of them were listing real activities that they were doing. Was I able, I suppose if you were a really good liar, maybe not. However, usually the what the student was heavily involved in would pop up in other places, right? So, if a student was claiming to be a 3 sport star varsity athlete and captain of all 3 teams, usually in a letter of recommendation, a teacher might comment, so and so is known for their athletics, but they're also a because that student would be known in that community. And so you might every once in a while think,
Yeah.
like, is this accurate? If the student seemed incredibly involved and yet no one ever mentioned anything, that might be a bit of a disconnect. I think the other thing that could be a disconnect is when students overestimate the amount of time they put towards their activities. So I would total up the amount of time they were saying, like the amount of weeks per year and hours per week, and ask myself, does this seem possible? For the most part, I know students are really busy and they're able to accomplish a lot. But if a student is claiming that they have 40 hours of extracurriculars, on top of being in school, 5 days a week,
Mhm.
and this is all year round, I would look at that with a skeptical eye. So I think it's
Mhm.
less about thinking that the individual activities themselves are invalid and more about, is the way that they are presenting them, does that feel accurate? Excuse me.
I agree with that. But that brings me to the next question. Um, so there are activities which parents feel will look good in an application for the
Hmm.
student, but may not be helpful for the program they're applying.
Hmm.
So, how does one define this from an admissions perspective? Is it the look good or the one that shows you that, yes, this helps me understand the student's skills or potential interest in the program?
Above and beyond anything, the activities should be authentic. So
Hmm.
when students are doing things just because they or their parents think it's going to look good, generally speaking, it might sort of be like, okay, great, they did that, but why?
Hmm.
Why do that? A great example would be community service, where,
Yes.
and it's often driven by parents, but sometimes by students, oh, I know community service is important. First of all, community service is not unless it's an institution with a service mission, in which case they're looking for students who are compelled by their mission. And therefore, for those students, community service wouldn't be checking a box. It would be something that
Hmm.
is really important to them that they're really actively pursuing
Yeah.
on their own. But otherwise, it's not a thing, right? It's not, you don't go down a list and say, oh, played a sport, check. Did community service, check. We're in student government, check. And the more checks you get, the
Yes.
better it is. In fact, it's really more about what's important to this student and how do they get involved in the things that are important to them. So doing something just because you think it's going to look good on your application and with no other reason, to me, is wasting your time. It is not going to help
Hmm.
the admissions office understand who you are. It is going to feel like, oh, yeah, this is just a kid who did a few things because somebody told them that this was important.
Yes.
And it's not going to come together to kind of create this more compelling application where you're thinking, wow, this student is really obsessed with the environment. And all the things that they do seem to be related to that. And then you get to the essay and you learn a little more about why the student is obsessed
Hmm.
with the environment.
Yeah.
That's going to really hang together versus the student who did a one-off and joined the environmental science club at school because someone said you need more school clubs.
Yeah. But does that ever happen, taking the same example, that if students shown a lot of interest through the activities and environment,
Yeah.
but is applying for a totally different program, does this sometimes throw you off from the admission, giving admissions perspective to that student?
I think it depends on what the area of interest is, right?
Hmm.
So, a student could be really active in sports
Yes.
and like just everything they do relates to that, but then
Hmm.
they're applying to be a philosophy major. There's no disconnect there if they're,
Hmm.
that's just, you can't necessarily, I mean, you can, but
Hmm.
sports isn't necessarily going to be your career and or your academic focus, and that's fine. If the activities are really related to a particular area that has academic applications, so as an example, a student who has done, they're in the science club, they are
Hmm.
volunteering at a hospital, they're doing a lot of things that you would associate with a medical career, and then they're applying for something. I'm trying to think of a good example because there's lots of things you could take with a goal of becoming a
Yeah.
doctor, but you run the risk of looking like you are, or you apply as a classics major and there's nothing in the file that would indicate any interest in classics, like you took Latin for 3 years, but that's it. And then you do no activities related to classics, but everything you do is related to medicine. I might look at that and say, this is a student who's heard that classics is a undersubscribed
Yeah.
major, and because there's nothing in the file from the letters of recommendation in terms of the activities, in terms of what
Mm,
the student is writing about in their letters or their essays, I might wonder, is that real, or is this a student who's just trying to obscure the fact that what they really want to do is become a doctor. So I do
yeah.
believe that can create a disconnect. If you want to be careful that you're not pretending to be someone different just because you've heard that, oh, this major is easier to get into.
Yeah.
That can, again, like, you want it all to hang together, and making decisions like that can make it seem like it doesn't make sense. And it's harder to advocate for a student where the application doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah. I agree again. Now, let's look at the profiles. Maybe you've seen 1,000 times from a particular region.
Sure.
Does that ring a bell? Like if you get a lot of students from, let's say, the UAE,
Mhm.
and let's say almost all of them have done similar activities, what do you think about that?
I think that in a system that where you really want to pop out and stand out, it is incredibly different to do so if you look like everyone else. So, there were, I've shared, I think before, there were days where I would read 30 files, and all 30 files were students with amazing grades, rigor, and test scores. And every single one of them wanted to major in biology and become doctors and had done the same activities outside of the
Yeah.
classroom. It's not exciting. It's not interesting. You're trying to craft a class of interesting individuals who will engage with each other and help others learn, meet different types of people with different types of interests. And so if everyone is doing the same thing, if everyone has the same interests, that's not the exciting class that you're looking for. So yeah, I do think that I find that problematic, because it also suggests that students are simply doing what people think is going to look good rather than what's really interesting to them. And you also will see it sometimes with students whose parents have a particular profession, and the parents are convinced that that's the only profession for the student. And so, they have the student doing those activities that they feel will lead to that profession, but the student,
Yeah.
it's tough to determine if the student really is that all that interested. But yes, doing the same activities as everyone else, not ideal for sure.
Yeah. Now, with the AI, students can do a lot of things in less time, more creatively. Some may be authentic, some just designed through AI. How are the universities set up to identify this from a genuine student?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the Wild West, right? It's a new frontier, and I think that admissions offices are trying to figure out that very question. How do we tell what is real and authentic and what is not?
Yeah.
And I think it's difficult to say exactly how. I think, some universities have tried, they'll run essays through a system designed to determine if it was
Yeah.
largely AI. The problem, of course, with those systems is that they can be wrong. They can flag a student. I think they're wrong more often in that they are flagging something that's not AI as AI. And with that in mind, a lot of schools have started to craft sort of their take on what is appropriate use of AI and what is not. Or maybe the high school has
Yeah.
an appropriate use and non-appropriate use. And what I'm encouraging students to do is really pay attention to those guidelines and directions. And if the college isn't offering them, what is their high school saying, and trying to pay attention to those. But that at this point, a little bit of it is you kind of have to, you kind of have to say to yourself, am I applying to college or is a computer applying to college? And I'm going to actually have to do the work when I arrive. So now is as good a time as any to be doing the work. But I do think that things that would stand out to me as potentially AI is when you have, for example, a student who is kind of a middling student, but they have a brilliantly written essay, which, by the way, the AI essays I've read haven't been brilliant. So, take that for what you will. But it's again this whole question of, does it hang together? So if you're doing something on AI, a project, and what we're hearing from your teachers is kind of, it's a nice letter of recommendation, but it's not effusive in the praise. And then the grades are solid, but not spectacular. The rigor is solid, but not spectacular. And then you have this phenomenal project that looks like it could have been done by a grad student. Those are the times when you start to say, is
Yeah.
this real? Or, is it AI? So I would say, come back to that same theme. It all should hang together. And if you are just an okay student, I would anticipate that a lot of what I'm going to see is going to be okay. And if there's one piece that's amazing, I'm probably going to look at that as an outlier and say, I'm not sure this is the student's work, for better or worse. And that's unfortunate if it actually is. But unfortunately, those are kind of the times that we live in now.
Yeah. Now we've seen that smart families or elite families keep falling for the same trap. And the trap is working with prestigious companies to build brilliant looking activities or profile. Now, a lot of families here invest heavily in profile building activities. Um, Given a student who has excellent grades and excellent activities versus a student with excellent grades, phenomenal SAT, but not such so perfectly looking activities, who wins the game?
I mean, again, the what you do outside of the classroom is really where students are setting themselves apart. So if the activities are kind of just okay, unfortunately, that student is probably not going to look competitive at the most selective schools. But I would also argue that well, I mean, we know that students who come from wealthy backgrounds tend to fare better in those applicant pools because they have, from birth, the parents have been spending a lot of money to help them be, you know, their best selves, whatever
Yeah.
that looks like, right?
Yeah.
But I will say that, you don't have to spend a lot of money on activities, but it is dependent on the student being engaged and interested in the things that they're doing, and it's important for the student to understand how important the activities section is
Yes.
going to be. But the most interesting things that I've seen students do were typically things that the students created for themselves. I have never forgotten, there was, and this is going back a ways, a student was taking driver's education here in the US, and there was a book that you had to study in order to pass the test. You have to take a class and then you have to read this book. It's not a long book, but you had to read the book, a manual maybe more, and then you have to take the test. The book, in her opinion, was so poorly written and it had typos and all of these. It was just terrible. So she actually wrote a letter and said, would you mind? Like, could I just take a shot at copywriting this thing, like going in and proofing it and improving it? And the person that looked at it ran it up the food chain and they said, why not? So because she was going to do it for free. So she literally rewrote the driver's education manual for her state because she was so appalled at how poorly it was written, and she took it upon herself to go and track it down, and I think showed an example of how she would rewrite a section, and they thought, yeah, that's good. Okay, take a shot at it.
Mm.
And if it
Wow.
wasn't any good, they wouldn't use it, but it was,
Hmm.
and they did. So that's an example to me of a student who was just doing something that every other teenager does, saw a problem and tried to fix it. That's the kind of thing that, I remember it all of these years later. It was literally probably 15 years ago that I read this. And when I read that, I thought, this is a student that we want
Hmm.
here at this institution. Um, so that wasn't something that someone paid for or found, someone else didn't find it for her. It was something she found on her own. And it was probably one of the most unique things I've ever seen in an application.
I agree. And I think you summed it well. Solved a problem, right? I
Yes,
think that is a very important aspect you mentioned. And I think it was a culmination of her curiosity and her initiative that she really wanted to do this and help the community benefit from it. I think
yes.
that is what elite universities are looking for, in my opinion. Uh,
Yes, I could not agree
mhm.
more with you. They are
Mm.
looking the way that they remain
Yeah.
kind of, whatever we want to refer to them, elite, difficult to get into, whatever the brand for those
Yeah.
schools is
Hmm.
that our graduates go out and do amazing things in the world. Now, do all the graduates go out and do amazing things? Absolutely not. But that's the goal. And how else can you tell if a student has the potential to do that than if they've already started to recognize that potential in the
Hmm.
things that they are doing before they arrive on your campus?
Yeah.
So, you know, I think the message here, right, is that paying for a bunch of activities that have no kind of purpose, no why,
Yeah.
that's not that exciting.
Absolutely. Actually, I think it comes down to what actually differentiates a real commitment versus something which has been created for university admissions.
Yes.
Now, let's flip it around a little bit.
Okay.
When an activities list, what was that list, if you remember,
Hmm.
um, which made you sit up in your chair and say, wow, this is so different? And what was so different? If you can give us one example.
Um, do you mean the actual list itself or the
Or
thing that
maybe
the
one or two
student was doing?
activities which were like so unique, like one of them you just mentioned, for
Sure.
example.
Yes, that was a
Yeah,
good one. That one was impressive. I have never forgotten the student I worked with who was on
yeah.
the International Math Olympiad team, which I didn't
Hmm.
actually know was a thing until I saw it on her activities list. Ooh, that was pretty impressive. And it's such a small group of students who make it there.
Yeah,
This is top of mind because it was just on here in the US last night, but the National Spelling Bee. Um, I had a spelling bee winner,
yeah,
which is pretty unique because there's only one of those every year. You have a certain,
yeah,
number of times that you can aspire to win it.
yeah.
That was something that was a wow for me. A student who was the top debater in the country in his area of debate, and had also created a tutoring. It wasn't an application because this was a while ago, but it was something on the computer. It was a tutoring system that he had beta tested it in his school district and then sold it to a number of school districts in his state and into a
Mhm.
couple of other states. That was really impressive. Um, there was a student who had was really involved, decided he was very interested in politics, and was lived in New York, went to boarding school,
Mhm.
wanted to be active in politics and in the Middle East, found that what was going on there very fascinating. Spent
Mhm.
the summer studying Arabic, in Jordan, I believe.
Okay.
And then actually had done some research on his own into an existing problem and kind of posited some solutions, sent that to a think tank in DC, and they actually hired him as a summer intern,
Mm-hmm.
which was incredibly unique because typically they only hired college students as summer interns, and he was a high school student.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, he did know some people, but knowing people got his foot in the
Yes.
door. It was the research he'd done on his own and the paper he produced that got him the internship. Otherwise, they were willing to have an informational conversation with him, but not hire him for a 2-month stint over the summer. Those are some
Mm-hmm.
of the more unique things that I saw students doing that I thought were really interesting, and I remember all these years later. There was
Fantastic.
a student who spoke 7 languages. Sorry, I remember her. She was great. She
Wow.
was that kid's sister, which is
Mm-hmm.
why, that triggered it for me. And that was also really compelling.
Mm-hmm. Great. You mentioned you had a student who had done International Math Olympiad,
Hmm.
right? It's a very predominant thing in Asia,
Hmm.
but may not be so, let's say, in the US. So
Yes.
when there is an activity like this, do the admissions officer spend time in understanding or, I mean, researching a bit about it, or it's on the student to explain what it was?
It's so there are things that are going to be really commonplace knowledge. If it is
Mm-hmm.
something that you suspect the admissions office won't know. Now, I will say this, most admissions offices read by region. And so if there is something very common
Mm.
that students in Dubai frequently do and are involved in, then the likelihood is high that the admissions officer is going to know what that is because they are reading files from all over the country. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if I come in and I'm just helping out, it may be less familiar to me. So a little information could be good.
Mm-hmm.
You should not ever assume that the admissions officer is going to research what that is because they don't
Mm-hmm.
have time. And, if you put a link in, they are, excuse me, generally not clicking those links. Often those links will not be viable when they're reading online because that invites, malicious malware and things like that. So you're not really clicking on links. That application has to do the heavy lifting in terms of
Yeah.
helping you understand what this is the student is involved in. But a huge mistake that I would see students making when they're filling out those activity lists is writing about the activity instead of their role in the activity. So if you do a good job filling it out, you should be able to help the reader understand what the activity is by
Mm-hmm.
telling them what you do as part of that activity. So
Mm.
it's not easy. There
Yeah.
are a lot of words that you are allotted to share this. That's where the additional information can come into play. If you're really afraid they're not going to know what it is, distill it down to a line or two and put that in the additional information section if you can't fit it in the
Mm-hmm.
activity section. But don't write
Okay.
3 paragraphs. They're not going to read it.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Now I'm going to come down to younger students who
Yes.
are, let's say, from grade 8 to grade 11 families, right?
Hmm.
That's a stage when they're trying to understand their passion, they don't know what they want to do. So, for a 14 or 15-year-old who honestly doesn't know what their level of interest is yet, so what's the healthiest first move in your mind? And what's the trap to avoid while they figure that out?
I think the biggest trap to avoid is to say, oh, you like this subject, therefore this is what you should do. That
Hmm.
is, I think where a lot of people start.
Yeah.
And, that's where you wind up doing a bunch of things that you're not actually interested in just because up till
Hmm.
this point you've been a good, like,
Yeah.
let's say, math student, right? That's not the way to go. What I would do instead is I encourage students to make a list. What do you like to do? And put everything on it, including I like to watch TV. Okay, what kind of TV? What shows? I like to listen to music. Great. What kind of music? What? It's never enough to just say, I like this and leave it. You need to dig into it. What do you like and why do you like it? And then when you have that list, you could go through and say, okay, well, like, what are some patterns that I see? Do I like really creative things? If I really love,
Mhm.
television and these kinds of shows, what do I like about it? Is there any element of that that I would enjoy? Like, do I want to write scripts or do I find the production part of
Yeah.
it really interesting, right? So the more you dig into the things you're really interested in,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
easier it is, I think, to figure out, how you might investigate those interests. And I do
Yes.
think the mistake that a lot of, especially parents make, is they say, well, all my kid wants to do is play video games. Well, all right, well, let's dig into that. What do they like about the video games? What's fun about it for them? Is it getting together with their friends online? Is it a type of game that they like to play? What skills does that game support or encourage? Because while I'm absolutely with the parents that you can't just sit around and play video games all day, you can at least use it as a starting point versus saying to your child, which parents don't always realize they're doing this, but like, well, all you do is play video games. You have no interests. This is,
Mm. Yeah.
you got to start somewhere. And if that's where they're at, that's where you start.
Interesting point. I think majority of the parents give up saying, okay, you're grounded because you're always playing video games and stuff like that,
Right.
not investing time in understanding that what can become a passion from this one activity.
Exactly.
Um, it's something to think about even as a parent, although I have daughters, so I don't have that problem. All right. How early uh, is too early to specialize in an area of expertise? And how does a student go deep without slamming doors shut, especially if they're weighing both US and maybe Canada options from that
Yeah,
perspective?
that is a little tricky. I think the most important thing that I encourage is don't stop doing something you enjoy doing just
Mm.
because it doesn't relate to your true interests.
Mhm.
So I would never, ever, ever, and there are people out there who will do the opposite, but I would never tell a
Mhm.
student, oh, you're not playing at a varsity level in this sport, you should stop doing it. I would never tell a student that unless they're like, I really hate playing this sport.
Yeah.
Great. If you hate it, stop doing it. If you love it, keep doing it. How early is too early to specialize? I think I think that the years before you get to high school are a great time to explore, and in my opinion, is probably too early to narrow yourself down too much. I keep bringing up sports. I don't know why, but mostly probably because it's easy. But sports are something that, like you'll see a student, maybe they're a gymnast and they've been doing gymnastics
Mhm.
since they
Yeah.
were kids. And then they're burnt out by the time they get to high school and they don't want to do it anymore. But now it's the only thing they do and they don't know what else they're interested in.
Mm.
So if you can avoid that, I think that's really
Yeah.
ideal. I also think that in high school, it's rare that you can just do one thing. So, don't get yourself too narrow. But if you're going to invest the most time and energy, it is nice to kind of, I know you refer to it as a spike, to do it towards that thing that's really going to, I call it well lopsided. But remember, it's not one
Yeah.
activity. It is a number of things in that area. So if you love playing an instrument, it's playing that instrument in the organizations at your school that offer it. It's taking lessons. It's maybe playing in some organizations outside of the school. It's maybe entering competitions. It's maybe teaching someone else how to play that instrument. Maybe it's volunteering your time to go to a local senior center to play for the seniors that live there. So that's a lot of different things that the student is
Yeah.
doing in one area. Um, so they are specialized, but they're not just
Yeah.
playing the instrument in the school band, right? They're doing
Mhm.
a lot of other things in it. I think by the time a student is a sophomore in high school, they should pretty much have that activities, the things that they're doing, they should be involved in those because
Mm.
you can't get to those leadership roles if you're not involved early. And
Yeah.
if you do something new every year, then it's going to look like you're not very committed to those things. Doesn't mean you can't add something in your junior and senior year or drop something, but it shouldn't be that you're adding the main thing or you're dropping the main thing that late in the process. That rarely leads to the student appearing to be
Yeah.
really deeply involved and committed in one area.
How late is too late?
Uh, I mean, it's never too late to do something interesting, unless it's after you've already applied to college, right? So that maybe is a little
Hmm.
too late because you can't write about it on your applications.
Yeah.
Could you do something interesting this summer that might move the needle on your application? Yeah, you could. It could be that up till now your activities have been solid, but you do something truly interesting with your summer
Yeah.
and that, you could put on your application and it might make someone say, "Wow, that's pretty interesting." Do many students do that? No. It's uncommon, not impossible, but the earlier you start, certainly the better. But there
Yeah.
is always time before you submit applications to at least, maybe add a little bit more, do something a little bit special. So it's never absolutely too late till you press it.
Yeah. Is there one thing you could identify or pin down? A student could who has no activities so far, going in final year high school. This is the last summer. They could do, whether free, local, unglamorous, to boost their profile. Any one activity you think
I don't
will
think
give
there's
him
any
that
one,
lift.
there's no magic bullet. No,
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
don't think there's a magic bullet. Um, if there was a magic bullet, neither you nor I would have a job, right? Like
yeah.
if there was a checklist out there that if every student hit it, then it would be no problem. That would be great, but that's just not how the US system works.
Yeah.
Every application is unique. Every class that you enroll is unique. What worked for one student, it drives me a little nuts when we have these students out there. I got into Stanford and I can help you get into Stanford. They generally have no idea why they got into Stanford, and what worked for them easily could not work the next year,
I
especially
agree.
if you're helping 20 students do what you did. Well, now there are 20 students with the same profile.
Yeah.
That is not going to be that interesting. So it's a process that is
Yeah.
tricky. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. Unless you worked in the admissions office, you don't know all the dynamics that play in the back
yes.
before a student is given that acceptance letter, all the committee decisions, all the activities evaluation, appeals, and all of that that come together. I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Um, Now, being in the Middle East, what I see, and being in Dubai, I see it is a race of
Mhm.
how many activities is my child doing, when do they start, who they're doing with.
Mhm.
So there is no end. There is no end.
Right.
As a result, the students are getting stressed out,
Yes.
right? So
Mhm.
how much is enough? Because there is no formula, I would say, and it's difficult. But what is enough,
Y-
right?
I actually sometimes when that comes up and parents or students are pushing for more and more and more, I'll sit down with them and go through the application, so the common application, and show them, this is you're going to be able to write one main essay. You're going to have two letters of recommendation. At some schools, it might literally be one. At some
Yeah.
schools, it's none. Although, the more selective the school, the more recommendation letters they will
Hmm.
ask for and or encourage. But the maximum typically that they're going to ask for
Hmm.
is a school counselor and two teachers, so three total. You only have 10 spots on the application to fill out for your activities. And while you might do more than that, there's really only like typically, and at some schools, they're going to skim after the first five. So it's really the first five where you can really have the maximum amount of impact.
Yeah.
And there's only so much you can do and do well, right? So if you're constantly doing more, you on some level, it's sort of like the essay. At a certain point, you have to say, this is done and put it to the side.
Yeah.
You can't keep rewriting it. I say if the student needs the time and space to be able to go to school and do well, to do some interesting things with their time when they're
Yes.
not in school, and to sleep and to have fun. And if those things are, you need them all in a balance. And if your student is getting 3 hours of sleep a night, or they're getting no time off because every single vacation is spoken for with activities they're doing for college or test prep or whatever, that's going to lead to an unhappy child or way worse than that, mental health
Yeah.
challenges, things like that. So, how much is enough? I can't say that, but I can say that if it's impacting every aspect of a student's life, that's too much. That much I can say. And there's, only room for select things in that application. And so if you're doing so much that you're going to need a 4-page resume, it's too much. One
Yeah.
page is really most that you need. And I've
Yeah.
seen students do great things in a few different areas and have that work really well for them. And I've seen students spread themselves way too thin and it not pan out at all.
I agree. And I think quality over quantity
Yes.
makes a lot of difference, in my opinion, as well.
Yeah, agreed.
Um, Perfect. My last two questions. Um, what is the questions or what are the questions parents should be asking about an activity instead of, will this look good on the application? So what should they be questioning themselves like about that particular activity?
Do you like this? My child like this activity? Do they want to do it? And does it go along with the things that they enjoy doing or are interested in? And does it have a purpose? Right? So I too dislike that question. Will this look good to colleges? And that's not the right place to start from. There's a great blog out there called Applying Sideways. It was written by an admissions officer from MIT back in, I think, 2013. So at this point, it's old, but it is absolutely still relevant these days. And it really encourages students to follow their interests and to do things that they want to do versus doing things for college applications. I don't want to be disingenuous, right? And, we're in the business
Yeah.
of talking to students about you need to have things to put on your application. So let's be real here. You're not always going to be doing something just because you love it. It is also so that you can have something to put on the application. But if you can at least recognize that I need to do things that belong on my application, but they should be things that I like versus something I'm just doing because I think it's going to look good, that's going to feel inauthentic and that's not really going to be helpful.
Perfect. Now, compiling all the activities together for a
Yes.
student joining final year high school, also applications open, Common App opens in July. What would be your takeaway tips for students for creating a strong storyline with all of that work they've done?
Absolutely. Well, for most important thing, you want to go when you list your activities in that section. You want to go from most to least important in terms of what you've spent the most time on and how important that is to you. And then within that framework, most to least recent. So sometimes I think students sit down and they think, oh, this is going to speak for itself. I'm just going to list them in the order that they occur to me. And then they're burying something and spot number 10, that's actually the most important thing that they're involved in. They spend the most time on it. It's the most important to them. That should go first, right? You do not want to go in chronological order with
Yeah.
least to most recent or anything like that. The other thing I would encourage is, can you be a little more creative with how you fill that out? Don't No complete sentences and punctuation. You have very few words to use there, and so in a perfect world, it's sentence fragments, so that you can fit in as much information about what you're doing as possible. Not to say that you can't write in complete sentences, just that those and all the words you need to make a complete sentence can sometimes take up valuable space that would be better used elsewhere. I have students, not it has to be authentic to the student, but I've had
Yeah.
students write really interesting ways about what they are involved in, and it shows their personality. I don't know that every student can do that, but if you are a student who can do that, please do. There's nothing better than getting to an activities list that is written in like fun language where it's a more creative approach. I'm coming up blank with an example of what I mean right now, but
Yeah.
it's fine to be straightforward. But if you are creative as a writer and a
Yeah.
person, that could be really great too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This was extremely insightful, specifically an area which causes a lot of stress, anxiety, and concern for the parents and the students. Thanks, Beth, and I'll see you again soon.
Thanks. Nice to see you,
Bye
and
bye.
we'll be back. All right.
Bye bye.